First of all, I want to thank Chris for the kind introduction and the tour that he gave us earlier today, and there are some of the docents behind you also helped with our tours today, so we're very appreciative to them and to everybody here at the Nixon Library. We've had an amazing day here, so thank you for your hospitality, everyone, and thank you for those of you who are in the audience who we have not yet met, but hope to sign books for.
I think John and I, first of all, thank you also for having us. So many of you, when we met you earlier, asked us about our process and how we write these books. And so I think tonight we want to get into a little bit of that too, to tell you about how we surprisingly ended up writing this book, reporting it. We weren't going to do another election book until things went sideways about a year ago on debate night.
I think it's like a year and 24 days.
Yeah. We were actually working on another project, and our publisher called us, our agent actually called us and said, hey, your publisher wants you to maybe do a book on this election. And so this is our third campaign book that we did. We did Shattered, as you heard, about the 2016 election. We did Lucky about the 2020 election. We thought that those elections were the craziest elections that we would ever report about and cover. We were so wrong. And when we signed up to do the book, we had no idea how much crazier it would get. I mean, our agent called us before Biden had dropped out, before Kamla Harris had taken over, before the first attempted Trump assassination and the second attempted Trump assassination. And I mean, we had no idea what we were getting into.
When we got the call, all we had seen was Joe Biden fall apart on a debate stage. And as Amie was saying, we weren't going to do another campaign book. We were done with campaign books. We're like, what else are we going to see after 2016 and 2020? And by the way, we just saw Trump versus Biden. Like, we don't want to do another book on a rematch between these two guys. We didn't want to do Adlai Stevenson, versus Eisenhower in '56. Like, it didn't make any sense. Whoever was going to win, it didn't make it. It was boring to us. But then we see what happens on the debate stage, and as Amie said, we get a call, and it's like, do you want to do another campaign book? And we're like, well, whatever happens from this point on is actually interesting. The problem for us is that we had done two previous campaign books, and we had started them, well in advance of a year before the election. I want to say, depending on the book, like 18 to 24 months before election day. In this case, we get this call in like early to mid-July about an election that's happening in November. And we're like, this is going to be so fascinating, but like, who's going to write it? Because it's really not a good time frame. And there were already other people writing books about this election. And what we kind of, I think you would agree with this, we kind of said was, it doesn't really matter what happened before debate night. Because whatever happens after debate night is completely different. The trajectory has been so altered here. And we didn't know for sure that Joe Biden was going to end up not being on the ticket, but we felt like Joe Biden was not going to be on the ticket. The guy that we saw go out on that debate stage could not stand for election. And the only question in our mind was, how long is it going to take for him to realize that he can't stand for election? And it took a lot longer than I think we initially anticipated. And as Amie said, we got all these twists and turns, right? When Trump gets shot in Butler, and I think we didn't actually agree to do the book until after that. It was that weekend we were discussing it. When he gets shot, Joe Biden is done. Right? There is absolutely no way. Some people would argue that when Trump got shot, he won the presidency. I don't make that argument, but I think that we agree that Joe Biden was done at that point. He was probably done from the debate, but 100% done at the moment Trump gets shot. And then the Democrats pull a switcheroo. We've never seen anything like it before. Have you guys, anybody raise your hand if you've seen this before? And I assume because you're here that you've given a lot of thought to American politics, right? And you're interested in American politics. I hesitate to say we'll never see anything crazier, but certainly nothing crazier has happened in my lifetime. And I want to talk a little bit, I want Amie to talk a little bit about this because it's something she's so good at. Kind of what we had learned through doing previous books as we went to put together something that we thought would do service to the substance of the campaign that we were covering and the electricity of the campaign that we were covering and the craziness of the campaign that we were covering, and do it in a way that readers would be willing to and interested in and compelled to go from page 1 through the end, even though they knew the outcome. So can you talk a little bit about sort of your thought process on like, how do we tell this story?
Yeah, so as John said, I'm obsessed with the details because you've all seen everything play out on television. So I think our goal, our mutual goal, has always been, how do we take readers inside the room? How do we show you what went on, the dialogue that went on, the tension? We're all about building this tension. There was so much of it, you know, in terms of, does Biden drop out? What is Biden thinking? He's in the biggest he has to make the biggest political decision of his career, and he's relegated to his home in Delaware. He has COVID. And so in the final hours where he has to make this intense decision, who is he talking to? What is he hearing? What is he feeling? And so our goal was always, you know, you're watching on TV what's going on. Biden's in his home. He's making this decision, but we really try to bring you inside this home. What's he looking like? Who is he talking to? And I think that has always been sort of at the heart of what we try to do in all of these books. And so when we talk to sources, you know, and people ask us, well, how do you know that someone said what they said at this time? We try to talk to everyone in a room. We do a 180. We talk to all the characters, all the people, the players that have been there, the people that have talked to people that have been there. And then we kind of build out from there to give you guys the full experience of what was going on. And we had questions as we were reporting the book. We wanted to know certain things, and I think that was always at the heart of our questioning. And so what am I missing here?
Well, I was just going to say in that vein, you know, I know we've talked to a couple of people tonight who have started reading the book, but for those of you who haven't, I will try not to give away too much here at the beginning, but we opened the book in Nancy Pelosi's condo on the Potomac River. And she is watching the Biden-Trump debate. And she is watching not the way that the former Speaker of the House would normally watch a presidential debate, which is she would normally be at a watch party. On debate nights, there are fundraisers all over the country. And there are opportunities for donors and activists to get together. And the political leaders of a party will fan out across the country to try to, you know, help stoke these things and to spin the debate afterward a little bit if they have to. And she's watching alone. And then we take you into Jim Clyburn's condo, a congressman from South Carolina, very influential in the Democratic Party, and he's mixing himself Jack Daniels and Diet Pepsi. I know some people think that is sacrilege, but he prefers Diet Pepsi to Diet Coke, so that's his thing. And he is also there alone. And Anita Dunn, who had done the debate prep with Biden at Camp David, instead of going to Atlanta where the debate is, she goes home and watches from home. And all of these leading Democrats who have been around Joe Biden at differing levels don't want to be with anybody else while they watch this debate. And you start to get the feeling, like the texture of like the worry at the very top levels of the party, where people who had actually had contact with him knew that there was a chance that this was going to be a total disaster. And we try to do that as much as we can in the book, but the reason that we open that way is we really want the reader to get a sense of that foreboding, even though they know what's going to happen. Even though you watched the debate, I assume most of you watched the debate or at least saw some clips of it. Like, even though you know what's going to happen, we really want to bring you in there in part because a lot of what happened with Biden was a sort of willing mass delusion within the Democratic Party. Now, I can't speak to the Mike Donilons and Steve Richettis and First Lady Jill Biden. I can't say that what happened with them was some sort of like, you know, benign neglect, right? I mean, I think it's more than that. The people who were very, very, very close to Biden obviously saw more than the people who didn't. But even the people, you know, sort of out of the Democratic, you know, out of the, as you go out through the layers, you should get that sense as a reader of the people who are close knowing there's a problem, a step out worrying that there's a problem, and the Democratic voters pretending that there's nothing going on, like this sort of willful mass delusion. And we try to do this with a lot of the scenes. One thing I wanted to just sort of point out is not everyone we talk to is a reliable narrator. We spend a lot of time talking to political operatives and elected officials, and they don't always tell the truth. You guys don't seem surprised by that. And part of what we're trying to do, obviously we have people that we've talked to for years and years, and that gives you a nice barometer if you've talked to somebody over a long period of time, whether they're somebody who generally tends to be more truthful or generally tends to be less truthful. And the ones who are less truthful, you spend a little less time talking to be honest. But we try to talk to so many people who are in the various rooms, and this is the Biden White House, the Biden campaign, the Harris campaign, the Trump campaign, the MAGA movement, you know, try to talk to people all around because some of these narrators are so unreliable. And what you find out is when people are lying to you, you kind of get a sense of when people are lying to you. And one of the things that I love about this book, this one thing, am I allowed to curse in here? So, I don't know if you guys remember, but when Biden got out, the story was he called Kamla Harris and said, "Hey, Kamla, I'm getting out and I'm endorsing you." And she was like, "Are you sure you want to get out?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm going to get out. I'm going to endorse you." She says, "Great, I'm going to go." And we listened to this over and over and over again. We're like, that is Kentucky Fried bullshit. There is no way that that's what this conversation was. And Kamala Harris wrapped up the nomination like the first day. I mean, she had Joe Biden's endorsement, Bill Clinton's endorsement, Hillary Clinton's endorsement, like, you know, within a couple hours, she had half the living Democratic presidents, and we will get into who she didn't have at some point, but she's on a roll. And we were like, the other thing that totally sounds like bullshit to us is that she didn't make any preparations for this moment. The whole thing was she's waiting, she's loyal to Biden, and by the way, I think she was loyal to Biden, but it was like the story, the narrative that was put out was, and we heard people say this to us repeatedly, she didn't do anything until he called her and told her that he was out. And we're like, this is not fucking possible, right? Like, so we talked to enough people, and we kept asking enough questions, and we found out, like, one of the scooplets in this book that I don't think anybody else had, even the ones that came after us. One of the scooplets in the book is that on the day he decides to get out, her family members and top staffers are meeting in the pool house at the vice president's residence. And they are going through what happens if Joe Biden gets out. And they already have a list of people that they're gonna call. And they're telling each other they don't think it's gonna happen for a while. But like, this is the meeting where they're like, here's our order of operations. And people had already done work on a spreadsheet to like get ready for the people to call. So that's going on. When Biden calls her, her brother-in-law, Tony West, is in the pool house having this meeting, and she has to send for him to like run upstairs to her house to listen in on the conversation with Biden. And a bunch of people are listening in on both ends of the conversation. And so it's, you know, him and a couple more of her aides, and then Biden's. And it turns out that actually Biden doesn't want to issue an endorsement of her, at least not immediately. And what he wants to do is take like kind of a valedictory lap, if you will. He wants to get out and tell everybody what like an honorable guy he is and how he's like George Washington. We heard him say that, right? And she's like, dude, you got to endorse me now. Like Pelosi, Obama, like they want to do some open convention. there are other people that want to run. Whitmer wants to run. Pritzker wants to run. Newsom wants to run. Newsom always wants to run. You guys are from California. So Newsom's running right now. We did his podcast. We walked off and we were like, that guy's definitely running. He was very nice to us, I should say. So she's in crisis on the phone with Biden. She's like, no, you need to do it now, or people are going to think that you think that I'm not good enough to be president. And Biden's like, yeah, well, I got to do my thing on my timeline. They go back and forth for a while, and then they get off the phone. And finally, he agrees that he will endorse her the same day. But I don't know if you remember, he put out a statement, and then he waited another half hour, put out a second statement. Meanwhile, Barack Obama's trying to organize an open convention. And she calls him. Harris calls Obama, and she's like, will you endorse me? And he's like, eh. He's like, I support you, Kamala. I love you. She's like, but everyone else, Bill Clinton endorsed me, Joe Biden endorsed me. What? So it was a lot more tense within the party than I think it looked outside, that whole sort of moment. And we could go into detail on that in the book. And I've been babbling for a little while, Amie, but I'm curious, was there a favorite sort of scene or part of the book that you would want to highlight as something where you're like, wow, we did, you feel good, we did some good reporting here or did some good storytelling?
I think that you just hit on a huge one. No one knew exactly what was going on behind the scenes with Kamala and Biden, but there's so many. Even inside the campaign, we take you inside. And one of the more kind of intimate moments, we take you inside the campaign on the night of, what was it, the karaoke at the end of the world. It's right before Biden drops out. And we take you inside the campaign headquarters, and think about it, everything is imploding around
So this
Biden.
Is the Thursday. He gets out on a Sunday. I believe this is the Thursday night, and he's just come back from Las Vegas to Delaware, and he's got COVID, and it's real bad. And it's much worse than his team is telling the public. Yeah. He is very sick. And so he's in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware.
Vacation home.
And his campaign team is in Wilmington, Delaware. In terms of California, these places are not very far apart, but in Delaware, they're pretty far apart.
Yeah.
So his campaign team is meeting on Thursday night for some festivities.
So they have a karaoke night. Everything is imploding around them. The campaign is pretty much over, they think, because as John mentioned, their boss is at his beach house with COVID. And so they're drinking and they're essentially doing karaoke, and they play that one of them or a couple of them start singing the Chumbawamba song, Tub Thumping.
I'm going to do this for a second. I get knocked down and I get up again. Never. Anyway.
It's that song.
Sorry.
For all you 90s fans out there. But I think it was one of the more intimate, revealing moments. It's not a moment you needed to know about, but it's sort of it kind of said everything you needed to know in that moment of what that campaign was going through. They're battling to stay in this race. They don't know what's going to happen. Their boss has COVID. Nothing is going right for them. And here they are singing, having this kind of moment of levity. And then, sure enough, 3 days later, Biden drops out. They don't know what to do. We take you back inside the campaign as two campaigns kind of merge. The Kamla people come in. The Biden people don't know their place anymore. Some people don't know if they're in charge or not in charge. And so I think all of these moments are really telling, not just on the principle level, but on the human level of, we've all been there and what it takes to sort of persevere with your world imploding around you. So I always look at that as a very kind of human, revealing moment, a moment that I think everyone can relate to, no matter your political persuasion.
The other thing I wanted to sort of talk about a little bit is, because we haven't gotten there yet, because this book is somewhat chronological in that.
But I should ask you, what was your favorite moment before we move on.
Well, I think the pool house stuff, like
Yeah.
that we were just talking about, but I think one of the things that we learned in doing this, one of the things that I think was interesting to watch and do the reporting on, was the degree to which there actually was a time when this race was kind of in doubt. And we go inside the Trump campaign, and there was a period, I think it wasn't super publicized, I mean, people kind of knew about this, but there was a period where there was this sort of sugar high for Kamala Harris. She gets her convention and she rises in the polls a little bit. And it's not just in the Democratic polls, and it's not just in the independent polls, it's also in the Trump campaign's polls. And Trump is getting nervous. And his team is like, just be chill. Like, eventually she's gonna show herself to be who she is, and she's not gonna be very good at this, and all of that energy behind her will dissipate. And by the way, the campaign will do what it can to point these things out. But Trump is nervous, and there's people in his ear telling him, you gotta get rid of your campaign team. And we know that Trump loves chaos, right? Like, love him, hate him, whatever, like Trump really likes to shake things up. And here he is with Kamala Harris running even with him. The Democrats have pulled this switch. He's mad. Some of his friends are in his ear saying, do something about it. And Corey Lewandowski, who was his first campaign manager in 2016, is like, your campaign leadership sucks. This is Susie Wiles and Chris LaSavita, the senior advisors to him. And Corey kind of tells Trump he's going to do an audit of the campaign, and he goes down to Palm Beach. And there's this real tension because Corey's down there and he is like, tell me everything that's being spent on everything. And like he ran the Trump primary campaign in 2016, and Trump won that primary. And, he deserves credit for that as a political operative, but he's never run a campaign the size of a national presidential campaign. And eventually it comes to a head. And Trump is sort of faced with this dilemma. Corey's argument is that Susie and Chris are basically bilking Trump, that they're basically, they're mismanaging funds, and in the case of Chris LaSavita, getting rich off the campaign. And it's causing turmoil in Palm Beach. And Trump's not doing as well as he would like. He's not running ahead of Harris. This is like early September of 2024. And Chris and Susie call him into a room at Mar-a-Lago, or maybe he calls them in, but they have a meeting. I guess they don't really call him into a room. And they kind of go through the campaign finances, and they go through what's going on with Corey Lewandowski. And then they're all on a plane. They're on Trump Force One, and Trump calls Corey back to talk with him and Chris and Susie, and he points at Chris and Susie and he says, they're in charge. I want you to go to New Hampshire and try to help win New Hampshire. He basically tells him to bug off, in a nice way, kind of bug off. And it's this kind of amazing moment, and we did a lot of reporting to sort of get all the little details around this, but it's this amazing moment of Trump looking around and feeling nervous about it and sticking with the people that brought him, basically being courting stability rather than chaos. And I think that's an important piece of his victory in this election. I think the people that ran his campaign were very good at not trying to manage him, but to manage all of the things that they could aside from him. He sets the message, he sets the tempo, and we will make sure we can do everything we can to support what he's doing. And I think Susie Wiles was very good at that. I think Chris LaSavita was very good at it. I think Jason Miller was very good at it. And I think the message to the public of him having stability at the top of his campaign, I think the message to the public of the consistency of his messaging on the economy, the consistency of his messaging on immigration, really picking a couple of issues that I think he felt strong on and that the public preferred him on, and sticking with them and being so consistent about it, sent a message beyond just the issues themselves that this was a president who was going to deliver on what he promised, that this was a president who was going to continue down the path that he started, which is different from the president that you saw from 2017 through, January 2021. That president was a lot more mercurial as a candidate, and certainly in 2016 when he ran, mercurial as a candidate than this one. And we do campaign books. This Trump campaign was the best of the 3 Trump campaigns by far. Best run, both at the candidate level and at the campaign level. Right?
I would agree. I think the other thing I should mention is we did this in Shattered, our 2016 book, which is probably my favorite chapter, when we take you inside what was going on. We do a 360 of election night, and our aim, I think all along, was to do the same thing here, to take you inside election night. And so we are at Mar-a-Lago, we are in Delaware, we're in Washington, we're everywhere that you want to be to figure out exactly what was happening. And I think, I'm not trying to spoil anything here, but you go into election night and you go into what Kamla Harris is thinking and what Tim Walz is thinking, and they honestly walked into election night thinking that they were going to win. And I think that is probably the biggest bombshell in our entire book. And I won't say any more because I want you guys to read the book.
But aren't you curious, what Kamala Harris is thinking when she closes her eyes on election night, and she has not yet conceded the election? She didn't do it on election night. She went out late the next afternoon. And we take you inside her house, inside the vice president's residence, and tell you what she's thinking as she closes her eyes that night. And I think that's pretty powerful. And we take you to the Trump victory party, and there's some fun stuff there. Chris Lasavita jabbing Corey Lewandowski in the chest and basically being like, "I'll fucking kill you if I ever see you again," something along those lines. "I'll gut you like a fish." And I may be paraphrasing here, but whatever Chris said would have been more colorful than what I just said. So, Amie, I kind of wonder, we've been talking about some of the fun, sort of interesting stuff in the book. Can you kind of walk people through our process a little bit? How we, because it's normally you have an author. And we get asked this a little bit, and I'm curious how you kind of see things, but this is our 4th book doing together. And as you can see, we don't exactly finish each other's sentences. Amy's very glad that I'm married to someone else. I hope my wife is also glad about that. But what's your, how do you see our process, and how do you think it's developed over the course of, really we started our first book together in 2012, so 13 years now?
Yeah, it's crazy. I know John people ask me what our relationship is like and how we write our books together. And it's really interesting. It's akin to knowing everything about your college roommate.
Not everything.
We have I feel like we had more tension at the start of our very first book than we do. We're so simpatico now. We see things in the same way. I was always very detail-oriented. John was very analytical. He has a very good sense of analysis and what things mean. And I've learned so much to become that, that analytical through you. And I know you've picked up on detail and reporting for me, but I think the beauty of our process is that we see things in the same way. I think we've always seen things in the same way. But as I mentioned earlier, our goal is to bring you into the room. So when we talk to sources, and we talk to a lot of them, we talk to more than 150 sources for this book on both sides of the aisle.
Many of them repeatedly.
Yeah.
People love it when you call them the 7th time. Let me just tell you.
But
they're I don't want the vacation through Hilton, thank you.
Our goal, all along as reporters, is to get as close to the truth as possible. And so that's why, to your point, we call, 5 or 6 or 7 times to make sure that the detail is right. If we're sitting on the stage, I want to know what color the chair is, what the stage looks like, what the people are drinking. John used to make fun of me because I would stop an interview in the middle. Someone would be telling us about a lunch they were having. And I was like, just a second, can you tell me what kind of lunch you're having? Do you recall what kind of lunch you're having? And that's all part of, the method to our madness is to show you, yes, they're eating a chicken salad sandwich and they're talking about something. So you can kind of like put yourself at that table. And so we talk to these sources and, we go into it saying, look, they see two reporters in front of them. We both John works for NBC, I work for The Hill. They think that we're gonna report these details right away. And so number one, we tell them our ground rules, which is nothing comes out before the election and everything is on background. And I know people say, oh, background, can't they talk on the record? But in order to get as close to the truth as possible, you want people to feel comfortable telling you what exactly was discussed. You want them to have plausible deniability. If someone is in the room, they can always tell someone, oh, no, I wasn't, they got that from someone else. So we always give our sources a little bit of cover as we're talking to them.
I remember when our first book came out, or one of the excerpts of the first book came out, we got a call from one of our sources. And he said, I just want you to, I'm letting you know that I've talked to Politico and I am denying this detail that you reported in your book. And I said, well, that's interesting. I'm like, because you're the one that told us that detail. And he said, well, that's why I'm calling you, because I know you have tape of me saying that. And I said, here's the thing. I don't care if you deny it publicly. We'll stand by our reporting. I'm not going to, our ground rules with you are such that we're not going to release the tape. So you go ahead and deny it to Politico as much as you want, but we're probably never going to talk to you again. So like that's, and I don't think we ever talked to him again for a book.
No.
But it's important with these sources to be able to, grant them the anonymity. Look, when the sources go on the record for books like this, typically, they're usually shining their own shoes. Is that like a reasonable way to put it? They're polishing something of their own. I'll give a good example. David Plouffe spoke on the record to the authors of Original Sin. And he basically was like, screw Joe Biden, he totally screwed us. David Plouffe was one of the senior advisors to Kamla Harris. He's basically, screw Biden, he totally screwed us. We didn't have enough time to win. And this is the narrative of David Plouffe. But what did he actually think? What was his view behind the scenes? Well, he may not tell anybody that, but the people that were in a meeting with him would. Because there's nobody who is being honest with themselves that actually thinks that if Kamala Harris had had more time, that she would have performed better. Right, I understand the political value in making that argument.
Except Kamala Harris.
Well, look, the candidate themselves is going to be, they're always going to be a little jaded about things and biased for themselves. But this is their argument. Their argument, all of them at the top of her campaign, is she didn't have the problem was that Biden got out too late and she would have won if she had run longer. It's just not true. There was a point in the campaign where Trump and Harris were essentially tied, and that was early September, all the way to early October. And then she lost, and more time would not have been good for her. Less time would have been good for her. And part of it is because she didn't have a reason for running. And look, I understand you're vice president, you get thrust into the role, you got to figure things out fast, but you should have a go bag. If you're the vice president, you should have a go bag. Here's how I would run the country. Here's what I would do differently from this guy who is unpopular. She goes out on the View, and they're like, what would you do differently? She's like, I can't think of a thing. And so she's like, but I'm different than Joe Biden. And you're like, well, how are you different than Joe Biden in any way that matters to me as a voter? Right, yes, you're a woman, you are younger than he is, whatever it is, you are South Asian and black and Joe Biden is white, and all this, but none of it is, what would you do differently for me as the voter? And once she said that, downhill. Trump people helped her. They definitely circulated it around. They did a good job of that. They helped her fall as well with an ad. Do you guys remember this ad? You might remember the Kamla Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. That's the best ad I've ever seen. I saw that the first time and I was like, many people who share my physical attributes, like 6'4", 300 pounds, I was watching a football game. And I was like, oh my God, that's the best ad I've ever seen. Like wow. And I'm like, I don't think that ad like single-handedly won the campaign or anything, but it did hit on a whole bunch of issues like at once, right? Like there's obviously the transgender issue. There is taxpayer dollars being spent on transgender surgeries. So mismanagement of taxpayer dollars or taxpayer dollars for the wrong use for, I think, a lot of voters. And then obviously the illegal immigration issue, right? So it's like transgender surgeries for illegal immigrants who are being detained in California, right? Like, and you like go through it, you're like, holy crap. You're like, wow, did she know she had said that? Like, so my point in all of that is saying, like, there's the truth that the operatives want to tell you and that the candidates want to tell you, and it's so that they can run again, and it's so that they can keep getting hired to run campaigns. And then there's the actual truth, and one of the things that we have to try to do is ferret those things out. And in order to do that, a lot of times it requires, I would say almost exclusively requires telling people that their name is not going to be attached to what they're telling you, because they know if their name is attached to what they're telling you, they're going to tell you something that's not true. Like that they like if they're like, well, my name's attached to it, I have to tell you the thing that makes me look good, or that makes my candidate look good. But if you take my name off of it, I can tell you something that's true. And then we like cross-reference all the different people against each other to try to figure out who's lying, even when they're given the protection of anonymity. But I think, it stands for itself. Like the book has sold well. It has, been corroborated by other journalists and by other politicians since it came out. I mean, the degree to which anyone has nitpicked with any of the facts that are involved in it is just that, like really nitpicking. And I think we've figured out how to do this kind of thing. Now the question, I think, Amie, that a lot of people are going to wonder is, what about 2028? Because we haven't decided to do a 2028 book yet. Right, like show of hands, who thinks we should? All right, who thinks like absolutely not, don't do it again? All right, well thankfully my wife's not in the room. Because she has to live with me for all of it. So, Amie, 2028, like how do you see, like today, if you're like, we would do a 2028 book, what are the challenges of that? And like, what do you see happening in 2028?
It's going to be a wild election. I mean, you can tell already because it's going to be wide open for Republicans and for Democrats. People always ask me right now, well, how's the Democratic Party doing? That's my beat, so I cover it every day, and the answer is not very well. And they're trying to figure out who their leader is, obviously. It's wide open. They don't have a leader. That's part of the problem. They don't know where they are, how to position themselves, if they should go further left or further right, or land somewhere in the middle. The energy is on the progressive side, but people keep saying, but we lost because of that. So there's all this tension already happening. And then you have candidates.
Amie, can I interrupt you for a minute? Do you think the Democratic Party like knows what it stands for right now? Because
No.
Like I can't figure it out.
No.
Like I literally like issue to issue, aside from like the don't touch Medicare and Social Security, which, by the way, Donald Trump also says. I can't think of a single issue where I'm like, this is where I think the Democratic Party.
That's part of the problem. They don't have an issue. A lot of Democrats have told me we should have focused just on the economy. Why are we focusing on every other issue? The economy and inflation, those were the issues that people cared about. We lost our way there. And they're pointing to Mamdani in New York right now, and they're saying, look, this guy, a lot of people, there's a tension there over him and where he is right now, and if he's a socialist or what he stands for.
I'm not sure who's more excited about Mamdani, the Democrats or the Republicans.
That's the therein lies.
And by the way, it's different than AOC, right? Like I look at AOC and I think to myself, like Republicans attacked her like out of the gate. They saw her and they were like, good looking, thoughtful, articulate, they were like, that's a threat. Like let's crib death that threat. And so Republicans jumped on her like day one. I think Mamdani is more like really about what he's actually said, and more about being able to articulate a real threat to the public than say like an AOC. Just using them as examples as like kind of people who are on the left side and Republicans talk about a lot. I think with her it was like they saw talent. I think with Mamdani they see both opportunity politically, but also like some danger.
Yeah. But here he is talking about issues like affordability, which is something that Democrats can learn on a national scale too. I mean, they missed the boat in November in talking about that. So a lot of people are saying, look, there are lessons to be learned from him on a national level. But I think wide open race, I mean, there are questions on both sides. Will Trump run again for a third term? Who gets the MAGA torch next? What does MAGA look like post-Trump? Because we haven't seen a non-Trump election in the last few cycles. And then on the Democratic side, who their candidate is, and does it reflect a more progressive view? Do they try to come back to the middle? When we talked to Governor Newsom recently, he is trying, you can tell, to position himself more as a centrist and not a progressive, which I think is kind of interesting. You guys might have some thoughts as Californians. But there's so many questions, and this is sort of like, a field day for people like us who cover elections, because there are so many questions that will come in 2028. So when we talked earlier about how 2024 was the craziest election we've ever seen, I always have to pause a little bit because they keep getting increasingly crazier.
That's the perfect segue. You said there are all these questions, and I believe it is time for us to turn things over to you guys and answer your questions. Yeah. Hopefully we were informative a little bit during this presentation, or at least funny and maybe a little profane.
Yeah, we do have about 15 minutes for Q&A, so what I'll do is moderate this with a handheld mic. Raise your hands. I'll get to as many as I can. You, sir, what is your question?
Wait, who do you like? Who's your favorite politician? I couldn't tell. All right.
3 times, Mr. Trump. Thank you. My question is, election day, and if you were in Mar-a-Lago or Delaware, where were you physically, and did you have a sense of who was going to win, and what factors led you to believe that? And also, I read that Elon Musk called it before the media called it. He said, it's over, Donald, you won. And he closed his laptop, and he had his own metrics that he was following. So where were you, and did you have a sense who was going to win, and why?
You go first, or you want me to go?
We did not know who was going to win. I mean, I think
Disagree.
I remember talking to my boss at the time, who we love to sort of go back and forth, and we were both thinking that it was like anybody's game.
So I was in New York at NBC World Headquarters in 30 Rockefeller Center. And I mean, it's interesting because like NBC is, old legacy media organization with nightly news and the Today Show and stuff like that. And also like has MSNBC, and a lot of the talent kind of goes back and forth. I mean, like as a reporter for NBC News Digital, I write for the NBC News website, which is more like the Today Show and the nightly news and the sort of old school. But I go on MSNBC all the time as a guest. And the vibe, at least on the MSNBC side for sure, was that Kamla Harris was going to win. But I remember having a conversation with one of my top editors on election night. It might have been like 4 in the afternoon, 5. Like it's before the returns are coming in. And she's talking to me, and I'm just like, I never want to tell anybody like what my prediction is for an election. Like I try very hard not to do that, because it's bad as a journalist to like kind of preconceive like what's going to happen. It's better to just react to it. So I try very hard not to be like, I mean, I watch what I watch, and I have my thoughts. And so this editor asked me a bunch of questions and like what I was thinking. And at the end of our conversation, she goes, "You think he's going to win?" And I was like, "I do." I was like, but I didn't realize it exactly until we just had this conversation, right? Like, you're pushing me, and you're pushing me because what I'm telling you is different from what you're hearing from some of my colleagues, which is great. There should be, like, I'm glad that they're not everybody in any room, that you never have everybody in a single room all thinking the same thing. Like, that's great. But she was sort of struck. She was like, "You really think that Trump's going to win?" And I was like, "Yes, I think Trump's going to win." Like, I can't tell you exactly which of the swing states or whatever, but like, I think this election's over. And ended up being right about it. I've been wrong before. In 2016, we both thought Hillary Clinton was going to win until election night, and then we wrote a book called Shattered, inside Hillary Clinton's doomed campaign. And the fun thing about that one was, our editor called us in like October. Sorry. Our editor called us in like October, and he's like, we had put in like 12 chapters of this book. And he goes, and we hadn't read them all together. Like, we had written them and we'd like sent them off and had not spent a lot of time because we were still reporting on the election. He calls us in October that year and he goes, "You guys have a problem." And we're like, "What's the problem?" And he goes, "Well, I'm reading these chapters and it sounds like Hillary Clinton's got this like disastrous campaign and she's gonna lose. But like, we all know she's gonna win." And there's like dead silence on the phone for like, it was probably like a minute, but it felt like an hour. And finally, I'm like, "Well, why don't we just see what happens on election day?" Not because I thought that Hillary Clinton was going to lose or Donald Trump was going to win, but because I was like, "Oh shit, we're going to have to fucking tear this book up." But I'm like, why would we start tearing it up in mid-October? We might as well wait until after the election. And as a result, we really didn't have to go back at all and tear anything up. But to answer your question, I thought Trump would win. There was no point during the campaign, even from the time that, Trump announced, or that, well, I shouldn't say announced. From the time he wrapped up the Republican nomination, there was never a point where I like looked at either Biden or Harris and thought to myself, they're going to beat him. There were days where I was like, I think it's pretty close here, but there was never a time where I was like, Trump's, behind the 8 ball.
All right, our next question, back of the room to your right, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Allen and Ms. Parnes, for being with us tonight. In your book, you went into some detail about the distress and the anxiety and the great concerns that Democratic fundraisers had about the Biden campaign after the first debate, obviously, and then the transition from his campaign team to the Harris, what would become the Harris campaign. And the Democrats were very, very effective over the course of the campaign in raising a lot of money that was intended, obviously, to help them get over the finish line. And then, from what I understand from other accounts, there was a great deal of assurance, as you're mentioning now, that they were going to win. But then after the campaign, there was all of this information that came out from insiders within the DNC about how donors felt that they were grossly misled, and that the inside campaign, inside the Harris campaign's polling should have informed them that things weren't going all that well. So my question is, what is the state of the relationship as of right now between the party and its donors? And to your knowledge, what exactly could they have done? Because if they didn't continue to raise money, that would have created suspicion. Were they stocking up for 2028 knowing that they were going to lose? But what's the state of that relationship now? Thank you, Chris.
It's not good. I talk to donors all the time as part of my job. They're not writing checks right now. They're really unhappy with the way things went down. They are trying to find specific candidates that they can support down the road, but they're watching and they're not happy with the current state of the party at all. That's an understatement. I mean, I talk to several of them like weekly, and they're just really, really unhappy. They feel misled. They feel like the party has lost their way. It's rudderless, it's leaderless, and they will flat out tell me, "I'm not throwing in another dime until this party gets its act together and can prove to me that that I should be writing checks again and I should be convincing my friends, as bundlers to write checks again. So I think there is a lot of distrust and there a lot of anger that has only gotten worse, I think, not better recently.
And let's not forget that the donors choked out Joe Biden's campaign. I guess the way that I like to think of it is, he's like, I'm going to try to stay in, and the donors are like, try to run without any money, right? And they're not the reason. They choked out his political campaign, choked out his political life, and it was a mercy killing, right? I mean, there's Joe Biden had broken his a horse had broken his leg or something, or a deer with wasting disease, and these donors are like, we're just not giving another dollar. We're going to force him out. And they weren't the only people, right? Nancy Pelosi plays a role. All these people play a role. It takes him 3.5 weeks to figure out what all of us saw on debate night. This guy cannot stand for election. But it took him that long to figure it out. Fair enough. Presidents take a long time sometimes to make decisions. But the donors feel like they've been conned. Right, there were top donors in Atlanta for that debate, and the next day they go out and they talk to the campaign leadership. And by the way, the campaign leadership, whether they're on the campaign or they're DNC people, I mean, these people revolving door. And the campaign leadership's like, there's no problem. And there's what the fuck are you watching? No problem, we're going to be just fine. Joe Biden is the greatest president who ever. I don't even know if I want those words coming out of my mouth, even though I'm paraphrasing other people. But I'm just saying that there is a huge trust gap between major Democratic donors and the people who raise money from them. And that is not going to be repaired easily, because you part with a lot of money and you don't get a result, maybe you stop giving to the person that's asking you to give. And the DNC is not the only piece of that. I suspect what you'll see is a lot of money go to the DCCC this year for House races. And if the Democrats are able to win the House, then maybe some of those relationships will get a little better. But if they're not able to win the House, what's the, watch out, Nelly, or something? I don't know, some old phrase, but close the door. The party's over, there you go.
Our next question from you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. Prior to the vice presidential debate, it was reported that Tim Walz indicated that he was concerned about letting Kamla Harris down. Can you speak to that?
He was so nervous going into the debate that he couldn't eat or sleep, as we report in the book. It was a mess.
Yeah, I mean, he was not ready for prime time. I mean, and to Amy's point, and Amie did, I should say, Amie really did some of the good reporting on this for the book, and some of the writing for it in the book. But this just Walz knowing that he wasn't ready. Right, he was worried about disappointing Kamala Harris. He was worried about disappointing the Democratic Party. I mean, he goes out there and he's, you see him on a stage and he feels like he's somebody who's very confident in himself. And the truth is, he was not that way as a candidate. So yeah, I mean, that's broadly, essentially true.
Okay.
Thank you for being here this evening. It's really interesting that you've really been in the locker room of the opposing teams, and we're getting a look into that. We've seen now over the last few years the border. The whole idea there was to get more votes. Let's just go there. The founders, and I just recently dumbed onto this, thought that having two parties maybe wasn't a good idea. What do you think about this now that you've been in the locker room of both teams?
So I actually kind of like our two-party system. Look, I think the founders were largely worried about parties, not just two parties. They saw that, but also parties in general and factions, factionalism. If you read the Federalist Papers, as I'm sure you have, there's a lot of concern about that. My view is that there are a lot of things that don't get addressed by the two-party system. However, I think that there is incentive for a party, like when there's something left on the table that's not getting done, there's incentive for the party that's out of power to pick that up. And by and large, over time, things do get done that are necessary. And I'm not sure in watching other systems that they work better. Maybe it's my I don't know, patriotic bias or whatever. I mean, I grew up in this system and I love our country and I think it works pretty well. We're lucky enough to be sitting here in the East Room. Sure looks like the East Room. We're lucky enough to be sitting here in the East Room talking to you guys. So I don't have a lot of complaints, but I understand that a lot of people do have complaints and there are things that don't get addressed. I'm just not sure that I've seen a system that does a better job of addressing the needs of the public. And I know everyone's lost faith in our institutions. I don't need a poll to tell me that. I just talk to everybody I know, and I travel the country and I talk to people, and they've lost faith in our institutions. I think part of that is that there's an expectation that the government will be able to solve every problem. And that's not true. I can't tell you how many Americans think that FEMA is supposed to stop hurricanes from happening. Right? I mean, you laugh. But it's true. It's this devastating flood happened or this devastating earthquake, and the government wasn't able to stop it. Right? And it's look, the government should do warning system, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the government can't do everything, and it can't fix every problem. And I think that there's an expectation among the public that everything's going to get fixed immediately. And I think that's and couple that with some, I think a Congress that's not as smart as it used to be, that's not as expert on policy as it used to be, and that is far more partisan and polarized than it used to be. A couple of those things, and common sense solutions are hard to come by. I still think we have the best system.
All right, we have time for one last question, and I'm going to step over here so that I don't get any feedback from the speaker. Come over here. And it's going to come from one of our interns. The Nixon Foundation is in the middle of a campaign, the American Civics Campaign. And the goal here is to bring in youth and let them experience events like tonight's, and to put civics engagement at the forefront, to teach them about the Constitution and the history of America and the way that our government works. And so I'm going to put him on the spot here and ask him to close out. What is our final question from you, young man?
What advice would you give to someone interested in running for office one day or pursuing a career in political journalism?
That's a good question.
Bingo.
I think running for office, we should start there. You need a message. We learned this in 2016. Hillary Clinton didn't really have much of a message. She was for everything, and you have to be for something. Everyone knew, like him or hate him, what Trump was for in 2016, what Trump was for this time. Democrats still were in search of a message. No one knew exactly what they stood for. They weren't finding ways to connect with voters. They were almost running the same playbook over and over again without learning the lessons of the past. And so I almost wish that people do, they read our books like Shattered to learn about what happened, but it should be a playbook for going forward and what politicians, lawmakers, candidates should be aiming for and aiming to do. So I think having a message and kind of tailoring your campaign to the now and what's happening. And I think Mamdani is a really good example of someone who is new, and whether there is this tension about people who like him or don't like him within the party, but he's doing things that are interesting to voters and are sending them to support him. And I think Democrats need to do more of that in particular. Do you want to address part two?
Well, I was going to address them both because I think they're similar, which is here's my advice. My advice is, if you go into politics, if you go into running for office, or you go into journalism, do it because you want to serve others. Do it because you want to actually make things better. Do it because you want, in the case of politics, to like come up with policies that are more efficient, more effective for the people that you seek to represent. Don't forget the people who didn't vote for you. I think a real thing about public service that annoys the hell out of me is that all of the members of Congress that I come into contact with, almost all of them, really want to serve the people that voted for them and are not interested in the people that they represent that didn't vote for them. And ideally, you could come up with like good policies that are good for both. Maybe not good for everybody. Maybe, you know, look, I'm not going to say like there's a million, you know, policies hanging out there that are great for everybody and improves everyone's life. But like, you shouldn't forget that like if you're representing like a whole group of people that you should think about all of them. But my basic point here is these are jobs that rely on you being somewhat selfless if you're being honest. And they are both also jobs that can make you famous, that can make you powerful. And understanding the difference between seeking office or doing news for others and doing it for yourself is important. And it doesn't mean that you can't succeed financially, can't succeed in terms of power, status, whatever, while keeping your eye on the ball. It just means you can't shift your eye or shift your priority to you. And that's very difficult to do. I know a lot of people in politics and a lot of people in journalism who started out thinking, I'm going to do this for others. And at this point in their careers, at this point in their lives, they do it for them. So that's my advice. If these are the things you want to do, be able to keep your eye on that prize.